Grace and peace, friends. It's Pastor Drew Ingram coming to you again, this time from home. The shelter-in-place went into effect for Travis County. It does allow me and a couple of other people to be at the church for very specific things, one of which is recording worship. But I decided to do this one from home. And so I created my own worship space. I put out some candles. I put out this kind of artwork or visual piece of Jesus washing his disciples' feet, the story that we'll hear on Maundy Thursday, and some scripture, and it's on a wall where we had a cross already in our house. And I invite you to do the same, to create your worship space, and I'd love to see them in the comments or in our Facebook group. And create some space to worship. And so I wanted to come to you from my home, and maybe next week and throughout Holy Week we might be back and forth between my house or the church, recording some different videos. But I'm going to share the gospel reading with you from John 11. I also hope that you got a chance to see Pastor Lori Rugi-Jones' video of the vision of dry bones from the book of Ezekiel. Chapter 37, verses 1 to 14. So that's in the email that I sent out that has this video embedded in it, or it's in the description on YouTube and Facebook to this video. The gospel today is from John 11, verses 1 to 45. Again, you'll hear this term that John uses, Jews, but what he means particularly are the opponents of Jesus, the religious aristocracy that was in line with Rome and invested in the current power structure. This is the Holy Gospel according to St. John. Glory to you, O Lord. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill, so the sisters sent a message to Jesus, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and you're going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them. After saying this, he told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he'll be all right. Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there's a stench, because he's been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. I don't know about y'all, but I've been seeing a lot about living the new normal in the season of coronavirus. This physical distancing and life at home and limiting our social contacts, in-person social contacts, by 50, 60, hopefully 90% to slow down the spread of this illness. But I'm not sure the new normal is the right word. You see, I think we are in a wilderness space. We're in a time of in-between. And this time and space, sure, it's uncertain, and we have to find a way of being in it. But the wilderness is not the end goal. The wilderness is where we wander between where God has brought us from and where God is leading us to. But the wilderness is not the place that we stay in forever. Neither is exile. In the book of Ezekiel, the people of God, the nation of Israel, are in all sorts of different places. They're isolated from one another. They're far from the places and the people that they love. And they're losing hope. They think God has abandoned them, that God has turned the other way. And then Ezekiel says, friends, there is hope, because God is a God who brings life from death. God is able to raise up from these bones new life. I've been dry and weary. We're isolated from each other in some ways. But God is with you and with me. God has heard us, and God is able to bring new life from this. Wilderness spaces and exile are not times when God is far from us. In fact, they're the times when God chooses to dwell among us, to remind us that there's nowhere that God is not. That God's love is there no matter how far we go. No height nor depth. We could go across the seas and still God's love would be with us, the psalmist reminds us. And so if we know that God brings life from death, and nobody knew that better than Jesus, he's telling the disciples the whole time, God's going to work through the death of Lazarus. This is that people may come to believe, and this isn't death, it's going to lead to more life. And Jesus knows this, so why does he weep? Why does Jesus weep? Because exile times of grief and death, we feel them. Sometimes they greatly disturb us. They move our innermost being. Jesus weeps because he loves Lazarus, because he loves those who love Lazarus, because Jesus, in the fullness of his humanity, feels fully what it means to be human. So Jesus knows the end. He knows this isn't the end, with Lazarus dead, with a wilderness, in exile. This is not the end. God will bring us out of this into new life, and yet Jesus feels that grief and that weight and that loss and that sadness. And he shows them, he expresses them, he does not turn and hide them. So we too are invited to feel what we are feeling, to love God with all that we have and all that we are, and that means everything that we feel. To be sad or lonely or isolated, to feel like God has turned away from us and abandoned us. And yet we always remember that Jesus, the resurrection and the life, is with us. That God can raise up from the midst of the death around us new life. But death is hard, and grief is hard, and they're part of this journey too. We don't get to Easter before we go through Good Friday, an important reminder as we move towards Holy Week soon. But we know the Easter story, and we know that Jesus is risen already, today and now. We know that God brings life from death. And so though we grieve, and though we weep, and though we try and figure out how to live in this time, we know that it's not all there is. And that is good news. Grace and peace until we see each other again.